સંધાન. All Gujarat Integrated Classroom.
સેટેલાઇટના માધ્યમથી જોડતી કડી એટલે સંધાન.
Welcome everyone. The topic for discussion today is Shakespeare as a dramatist based on his tragedies. In order to understand Shakespeare, we need to understand his tragedies. The best way to place the dramatist is to understand his works, especially tragedies. As practiced in Renaissance England and in classical Greece and Rome, tragedy is an intense exploration of suffering and evil, focused on the experience of an exceptional individual, distinguished by rank or character, or both. Typically, it presents a steep fall from prosperity to misery and ultimately death. A great change occasioned or accompanied by conflict between the tragic character and some superior power. It might be said, therefore, that conflict and change, the first intense, if not violent, the second extreme, together constitute the essence of tragedy. In his seminal account of the subject, Aristotle said that the success of a tragedy depends on its capacity to excite pity and fear, thereby affecting a catharsis of these emotions. 20th century commentators have interpreted this as referring to the contrary responses of attraction and repulsion. Pity draws us sympathetically to the protagonist, regretting his or her suffering as unjust or disproportionate. Fear denotes an attitude to the protagonist of dissociation and judgment and acknowledges the rightness of what has happened. Thus, catharsis in single quote, for contemporary critics is the term applied to a state of mind in which the powerful and conflicting emotions generated by the spectacle of great suffering are reconciled and transcended through artistic representation, so that a condition of exultant but grave understanding remains. Philosophers G.W. Hegel and F. Nietzsche also have discussed the nature of conflict in tragedy. According to Hegel, the characteristic conflict in tragedy is not between ethical right and wrong, but between the personal embodiments of a universal ethical power, both of whom push their rightful claim to the point where it encroaches on the other's right and so becomes wrongful. The resolution of this conflict restores a condition of natural justice and confirms the existence of a just and divine order. Nietzsche rejected the idea of such an order, but he too saw contrariety at the center of the universe. This is in single quote. And as tragedy as a process involving the conflict and the reconciliation of opposites. For example, Apollo and Dionysus, the first symbolizing reason, control and art, and the second passionate destructive energy, orgiastic abandon, and the self-renewing force of life itself. What is Shakespearean tragedy? Macbeth says, in Macbeth it is said, double, double, toil and trouble. Act 4, Scene 1, line number 10. A famous critic on Shakespeare has remarked that there is no such thing as Shakespearean tragedy. There are only Shakespearean tragedies. Kenneth More comments, I quote, "An essential part of Shakespeare's tragic pattern implies that these plays do have some shared characteristics peculiar to them." Unquote. Shakespeare's profound tragedies are four: Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth. Romeo and Juliet is a pure tragedy, but it is an early work. Richard II, Richard III, Julius Caesar, Antony and Cleopatra, and Coriolanus are tragic histories or historical tragedies, in which Shakespeare acknowledged in practice obligation to follow his authority, even when that authority offered him an undramatic material. The question, while discussing Shakespeare as a playwright, may be stated: what is the substance of a Shakespearean tragedy? Or what is the nature of the tragic aspect of life as represented by Shakespeare? What is Shakespeare's tragic conception or conception of tragedy? How does the dramatist Shakespeare emerge from his tragedies? What are the characteristic aspects of tragedies that make that play a Shakespearean tragedy? Shakespeare, in writing tragedy, did represent a certain way, and a thorough examination of his writings ought to be able to describe this aspect and way in terms addressed to the understanding. However, we need to be careful in two ways. In the first place, we must remember that the tragic aspect of life is only one aspect. We cannot arrive at Shakespeare's whole dramatic way of looking at the world from his tragedies alone, as we can arrive at Milton's way of regarding things, or at Wordsworth's or Shelley's, by examining any one of their important works. And in the second place, we are to keep restricted to his dramatic view and are not to ask whether it corresponded exactly with his opinions or creed outside his poetry. Shakespeare's tragedy is the story of one person, the hero in single quote, or heroine once again in single quote. Moreover, it is only in the love tragedies, that is Romeo and Juliet and Antony and Cleopatra, that the heroine is as much the center of the action as the hero. The rest, including Macbeth, are single stars. One, therefore, may speak of the tragic story as being concerned primarily with one person. Story in Shakespeare's plays depicts the troubled part of the hero's life, which precedes and leads up to the death of the hero. This is an instantaneous death occurring by accident, in single quote, in the midst of prosperity, would not suffice for it. It is, in fact, essentially a tale of suffering and calamity conducting to that death. The suffering and calamity are, however, exceptional. They befall a conspicuous person. They are themselves of some striking kind. They are also, as a rule, unexpected and contrasted with previous happiness and glory. A tale, for example, of a man slowly worn to death by diseases, poverty, little cares, sordid vices, petty persecutions, however piteous or dreadful might be, would not be tragic in the Shakespearean sense. Such exceptional suffering and calamity are an essential ingredient in tragedy and a chief source of the tragic emotions, and especially of pity. Pity, for example, has much larger part in King Lear than in Macbeth. Shakespearean tragedy is a story of an exceptional calamity leading to the death of a man in high estate, and that the story is one of human actions producing exceptional calamity and ending in the death of such man. The medieval construction of tragedy included a total reversal of fortune, coming unawares upon a man who, I quote, stood in high degree, quotes over, happy and apparently secure. It appealed strongly to common human sympathy and pity. It startled also another feeling, that of fear. It frightened man and awed them. It made them feel that man is blind and helpless, the plaything of an inscrutable power called by the name of fortune, F capital. Shakespeare's idea of tragedy is larger than this idea and goes beyond it. Tragedy with Shakespeare is concerned always with, in single quote, high degree, often with kings or princes, if not with leaders in state like Coriolanus, Brutus, and Antony. At the least, as in Romeo and Juliet, with members of great houses whose quarrels are of public moment. There is a decided difference here between Othello and three other tragedies, but it is not a difference of kind. Othello himself is no mere private person. He is the general of the Republic. At the beginning, we see him in the council chamber of the Senate. The consciousness of his high position never leaves him. At the end, when he is determined to live no longer, he is as anxious as Hamlet not to be misjudged by the great world, and his last speech begins, I quote, "Soft you, a word or two before you go. I have done the state some service, and they know it," unquote. The pangs of despised love and the anguish of remorse are the same in a peasant and a prince, but they cannot be so when the prince is really a prince. The story of the prince or the general has a greatness and dignity of its own. His fate affects the welfare of a whole nation or empire, and when he falls suddenly from the height of earthly greatness to the dust, his fall produces a sense of contrast, of the powerlessness of man and of the omnipotence of fortune or fate with F capital, with no tale of private life can possibly rival. In the figure of the maddened Leah, one sees, I quote, a sight most pitiful in the meanest wretch, past speaking of in a king, unquote. Shakespearean tragedy, so far as considered, may be called a story of exceptional calamity leading to the death of a man in high estate. Shakespearean tragedy do not simply happen, nor they are sent. They proceed mainly from actions, and those the actions of man. The actions of human beings beget others, and these others beget others again, until this series of interconnected deeds leads by an apparently inevitable sequence to a catastrophe. Shakespeare's men appear to us primarily as agents, I quote, themselves the authors of their proper woe, unquote. The story in single quote, or action also in single quote, of a Shakespearean tragedy does not consist solely of human actions or deeds, but deeds are the predominant factor. These deeds are, for the most part, actions in the full sense of the word. I quote, between asleep and wake, quote so on, but are also acts or omissions thoroughly expressive of the doer. The calamities and catastrophe follow inevitably from the deeds of men, and that the main source of these deeds is character. With Shakespeare, again in single quote, character is destiny, quote over. Shakespeare represents abnormal conditions of mind, insanity, for example. But these abnormal conditions are never introduced as the origin of deeds of any dramatic moment. Lady Macbeth's sleepwalking has no influence whatever on the events that follow it. Macbeth did not murder Duncan because he saw a dagger in the air. He saw the dagger because he was about to murder Duncan. King Lear's insanity is not the cause of a tragic conflict any more than Ophelia's. It is, like Ophelia's, the result of a conflict, and in both cases the effect is mainly pathetic. Shakespeare also introduces the supernatural into some of his tragedies. He introduces ghosts, witches, etc. But the supernatural is always placed in the closest relation with character. It gives a confirmation and a distinct form to inward movements already present and exerting an influence. There is already an evil within. The witches only are a symbol of the inner happening. To the sense of failure in Brutus, to the stifled workings of conscience in Richard, to the half-formed thought or the horrified memory of guilt in Macbeth, to suspicion in Hamlet. Shakespeare further allows chance in single quote or accident once again in single quote an appreciable influence at some point in the action. Chance or accident are very important parts in Shakespeare's plays. It may be called an accident that Romeo never got the friar's message about the potion, and that Juliet did not awake from her long sleep a minute sooner. An accident that Edgar arrived at the prison just too late to save Cordelia's life. An accident that Desdemona dropped her handkerchief at the most fatal of moments. An accident that the pirate ship attacked Hamlet's ship so that he was able to return to Denmark. These are the chances. Without them, the tragedy would not have happened. The play would not have progressed in the way that Shakespeare had designed. So, chance or accident are minor looking but very crucial parts in a Shakespearean tragedy. In Shakespeare's works, the idea of conflict is presented in its more general form. The conflict may quite naturally be conceived as lying between two persons of whom the hero is one, or more fully as lying between two parties or groups in which the hero is the leading figure. The love, for example, of Romeo and Juliet is in conflict with the hatred of their houses, represented by various other characters. The cause of Brutus and Cassius struggles with that of Julius, Octavius, and Antony. In Richard II, the king stands on one side, Bolingbroke and his party on the other. In Macbeth, the hero and heroine are opposed to the representatives of Duncan. In all these cases, the great majority of the dramatis personae fall without difficulty into antagonistic groups, and the conflict between these groups ends with the defeat of the hero. Just like outward conflict of persons and groups, there is also a conflict of forces in the hero's soul. If one compares the earlier tragedies with the later, one may find that it is in the latter, the maturest works, that these inward struggles are most emphasized. Hamlet, Macbeth, Julius Caesar, King Lear, etc. are examples of the same. If we consider the outer and the inner struggle, we must employ some such phrase as, in single quote, spiritual force. This will mean whatever forces act in the human spirit, whether good or evil, whatever forces act in the human spirit, whether good or evil, whether personal passion or impersonal principle, doubts, desires, ideas, etc. Whatever can animate, shake, possess, and drive a man's soul. in a Shakespearean tragedy, some such forces are shown in conflict. Treasonous ambition in Macbeth collides with loyalty and patriotism in Macduff and Malcolm, two opposite forces represented by Macbeth on one side and Malcolm and Macduff on the other side. These powers or principles equally collide in the soul of Macbeth himself. There is a conflict outside and there is a conflict within. The forces are opposite and the collision is very powerful, very visible. The hero with Shakespeare is a person of high degree or of public importance, and that his actions or sufferings are of an unusual kind. His nature also is exceptional and generally raises him in some respect much above the average level of humanity. For example, Hamlet and Cleopatra have genius. Others like Othello, Lear, Macbeth and Coriolanus are built of grand scale, and desire, passion or will attains in them a terrible force. There is a greatness of the hero, but this force also is equally great. In almost all, one observes a marked one-sidedness, a predisposition in some particular direction, a total incapacity of resisting the force which draws in this direction, a fatal tendency to identify the whole being with one interest, object, passion or habit of mind. This is, for Shakespeare, the fundamental tragic trait. It is a fatal gift, but it carries with it a touch of greatness, the tragic trait and the tragic greatness. And when there is joined to it nobility of mind or genius or immense force, we realize full power and reach of the soul, and conflict in which it engages acquires that magnitude which stirs not only sympathy and pity, but admiration, terror and awe. Posthumus would never have acted as Othello did. If, like Posthumus, he has remained convinced of his wife's infidelity, he would not have repented her execution. If, like Leontes, he had come to believe that by an unjust accusation he had caused her death, he would never have lived on like Leontes. But the fatal impression or error is of different kinds and degrees. At one extreme stands the excess and precipitancy of Romeo, and at the other the murderous ambition of Richard III. In most cases, the tragic error involves no conspicuous breach of right. In some, as in Brutus and Othello, it is accompanied by a full conviction of right. In Hamlet, there is a painful consciousness that duty is being neglected. In Antony, a clear knowledge that the verse of the two courses is being pursued. But Richard and Macbeth are the only heroes who do what they themselves recognize to be villainous. The path is created by themselves, chosen by themselves. It is important to observe that Shakespeare does admit such heroes, the difficulty that arises from their admission. The difficulty is that the spectator must desire their defeat and even their destruction, and yet this desire and the satisfaction of it are not tragic feelings. Shakespeare gives to Richard a power which exalts astonishment and a courage which exalts admiration. Macbeth is similarly great. Shakespeare adds in him a conscience so terrifying in its warnings and so maddening in its reproaches that the spectacle of inward torment compels a horrified sympathy and awe which balance at the least the desire for the hero's ruin. The tragic hero in Shakespeare need not be good in single quote, but it is necessary that he should have so much greatness that in his error and fall one may be vividly conscious of the possibilities of human nature. Therefore, a Shakespearean tragedy is never depressing. No one ever closes the book with the feeling that man is a poor, mean creature. He may be wretched and he may be awful, but he is not small. The central feeling, therefore, is the feeling of waste. The pity and fear which are stirred by the tragic story seem to unite with and even to merge in a profound sense of sadness and mystery, which is due to this impression of waste. Tragedy, thus, for Shakespeare, is the typical form of this mystery, because that greatness of soul which it exhibits, oppressed, conflicting and destroyed, is the highest existence of our view. Now this is very interesting. In this tragic world where individuals, however great they may be and however decisive their actions may appear, are so evidently not the ultimate power, then what is this power which could be considered as ultimate? It seems, now this question is very interesting as well. It seems that Shakespeare looked at this secular, in single quote, in this secular world more intently and seriously, and he painted with entire fidelity, without the wish to enforce an opinion of his own, and without regard to anyone's hope, fear, and beliefs. His greatness is largely due to his fidelity in the mind of extraordinary power. The tragic fact that Shakespeare represents can be observed in two ways. One, that the tragic fact remains to us something piteous, and the other, that the representation of it does not leave us crushed, rebellious, or desperate. Two kinds of feelings. From the first emerges that the ultimate power in the tragic world of Shakespeare is a, in single quote, moral order. Moral in single quote. The spectacle of suffering and waste could not seem to us so fearful and mysterious as it does. And the second follows that this ultimate power is not adequately described as a fate, whether malicious or cruel or blind and indifferent to human happiness and goodness. This is probably Shakespeare's tragic view of the world. A Shakespearean hero is a doomed man who drifts, struggling to destruction, like helpless creature born on an irresistible flood towards a cataract. His fault is far from being the sole or sufficient cause of all they suffer. The power from which they cannot escape in relentless and immovable full tragic effect. Hamlet says, I quote, "Our thoughts are ours, their ends none of our own." Unquote. I repeat the quote. Our thoughts are ours, their ends none of our own. Unquote. Their ends, in single quote, their ends are issues or outcomes of our thoughts. The tragic world is a world of action. And what is action? Action is the translation of thought into reality. This is interesting, is it not? The tragic world is a world of action. And what is action? Action is the translation of thought into reality. So basically, what is important? The most important thing is thought. Once there is a thought, then there is an action, and when there is an action, there is a reality, and when there is a reality, there is the end to the reality. For example, no one could mean better than Brutus, but he contrives misery for his country and death for himself. No one could mean worse than Iago, and he too is caught in the web he spins for others. Hamlet, recoiling from the rough duty of revenge, is pushed into blood guiltiness he never dreamt of, and forced at last on the revenge he could not will. Lear follows an old man's whim, half generous, half selfish, and in a moment it loses all the powers of darkness upon him. Othello agonizes over an empty fiction, and meaning to execute solemn justice, butchers innocence and strangles love. Coriolanus thinks that his heart is iron, and it melts like snow before a fire. Lady Macbeth, who thought she could dash out her own child's brains, Lady Macbeth, who thought she could dash out her own child's brains, finds herself hounded to death by the smell of a stranger's blood. So, thought and action, and the end of the action, that is the whole sequence. Everywhere in this tragic world, men's thought translated into act is transformed into the opposite of itself. His act, the movement of a few ounces of matter in a moment of time, becomes a monstrous flood which spreads over a kingdom. And whatsoever he dreams of doing, he achieves that which he least dreamed of, his own destruction. This would suggest the idea of fate, because it shows man as the cause of his own undoing. Man as the cause of his own undoing. Juliet's waking from her trance a minute too late. Desdemona's loss of her handkerchief at the only moment when the loss would have mattered. That insignificant delay which cost Cordelia's life. How would man escape such vehement propensities as drove Romeo, Antony, Coriolanus to their doom? And why is it that a man's virtues help to destroy him, and that his weakness or defect is so intertwined with everything that is admirable in him that we can hardly separate them even in imagination? In a Shakespearean tragedy, the rigor of its justice is terrible, no doubt. For a tragedy is a terrible story. But in spite of fear and pity, our sense of justice is satisfied. So, at the end of the play, the spectator, the reader, is satisfied. despite having the sense of pity and fear. Now, this justice in single quote must at once be distinguished from poetic justice. Now, this justice is different from the word poetic justice. Poetic justice means prosperity and adversity distributed in proportion to the merits of the agents. Poetic justice means prosperity and adversity distributed in proportion to the merits of the agents. But for Shakespeare, to borrow a quote from Greek, the doer must suffer, into quotes. One can also find that villainy never remains victorious and prosperous at the last. This is what is recognized as the connection between act on one side and consequence on the other. The doer must get what he deserves. For instance, Lear deserved to suffer for his folly, selfishness, and tyranny. In Shakespearean tragedy, the main source of the convulsions which produces suffering and death is never good. Good contributes to this convulsion only from its tragic implication with its opposite in one and the same character. It lies within one character only. The main source, on the contrary, is in every case evil in the fullest sense. The love of Romeo and Juliet conducts them to death only because of the senseless hatred of their houses. Guilty ambition, seconded by diabolic malice and issuing in murder, opens the action in Macbeth. Iago is the main source of the convulsion in Othello. Hamlet has to deal the situation which has been formed by adultery and murder. However, Julius Caesar is the only tragedy in which one is even tempted to find an exception to this rule. A Shakespearean hero shows some marked imperfection or defect. For example, irresolution, precipitancy, pride, credulousness, excessive simplicity to sexual emotions, and the like. These defects or imperfections are certainly, in the wide sense of the word, evil. What is evil? All these things. And they contribute decisively to the conflict. Now, this evil leads to conflict. When the evil in the hero masters the good and has its way, it destroys other people through him, but it also destroys him as well. Moreover, Shakespeare's comic elements in tragedies functions as a safety valve, foretelling the kind of appropriate laughter, that scenes of great tension and high passion are likely to provoke. Comedy with Shakespeare is woven into the fabric of the drama, being psychologically consistent with the satiric, mocking, and deranged aspects of the tragic and villainous characters, and functioning always as thematic variations and ironic counterpoint in relation to the tragic narrative. Shakespeare's tragedies focus on the phenomenon of change. Now this is very important. But change here is not just one of the worldly fortunes. It is above all else interpersonal, moral and psychological change. It is above all else interpersonal, moral and psychological change. An essential part of the hero's experience is the horrified discovery that the world he knows and values, the people he loves and trusts, are changing or have changed utterly. He feels cheated and betrayed, into quotes, to the very heart of loss. Quotes over. Hamlet expresses his sense of overwhelming change in eloquently cosmic terms. Act 2, Scene 2, lines 282 to 286. I quote, "This goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory. This most excellent canopy, the air, look you. This majestical roof fretted with golden fire. Why, it appears no other thing to me than a foul and pestilent congregation of vapors." Quotes over. Based on the four elements, the imagistic pattern here shows that Hamlet construes change in terms of the pre-modern model of contrarious nature. In consequence, he tends to see change antithetically from one extreme to the other. This is one important aspect of Shakespeare as a dramatist. Whereas Seneca's tragedies invoked a general correspondence between disorder in the human and the natural world, in Shakespeare's tragedies, the inabilities, ambiguities and contradictions, as well the fruitful harmonies of human nature and history, are precisely coextensive with those of nature. Despite its inherent thrust towards violent confusion, nature is implicitly understood as an order. Nature is an order, and that order is seen primarily in terms of time, T capital. What is the ultimate power in Shakespeare's tragic world? Once again the question arises. The most reasonable answer would seem to be nature in its temporal dimension. In pre-modern cosmology, time is a measured movement of the elemental world, and like it, discloses a cyclic pattern of binary and quadruple oppositions. For example, day and night, spring and autumn, summer and winter. Accordingly, the confusion of night and day is a characteristic feature of Shakespeare's tragedy. Violent action being often nocturnal, either in conception or execution, night is conceived as a time of rest and peace violated, and as a symptom of chaos. The imagery of Julius Caesar Othello, and Macbeth involves the mythical identification of night and hell, Erebus as the children of chaos. More importantly, the deed which generate the tragic action are untimely or mistimed, in the sense that they are dilatory or either rash or cunningly swift. Time's action is corrective also in the sense that it is restorative, a force for renewal. The cyclic and dialectical order of nature entails that the positive undertone in Shakespeare's tragic ending is a necessary and logical counterpart to the negative undertone in his cosmic endings. Nevertheless, the overall impression in the tragedies is of a world where time is put disastrously out of joint with terrifying ease, and can only be set right again at huge cost. To end, in his tragedies, Shakespeare was probably not justifying the ways of God to man, or to show the universe as a divine comedy. The bard was writing tragedy, and tragedy would not be tragedy if it were not a painful mystery. Thank you very much.
Sandhan. All Gujarat Integrated Classroom.
સેટેલાઇટના માધ્યમથી જોડતી કડી એટલે સંધાન.